Hi, my name is Eva Schubert. I'm a jazz singer and songwriter, and today I'd like to tell you about one of my favorite jazz singers. Louis Armstrong is someone whose music is famous around the world even today. You think about What a Wonderful World, Mac the Knife, La Vie en Rose, When You're Smiling. These are some of my favorite Louis songs. And they're all associated with happiness. I mean, the world seems perfect and all is sweetness and light when you listen to this music. So I was astonished to find out just how miserable and desperate his early life really was. Louis was born in 1901 in New Orleans. He was the son of a factory worker and a 16-year-old girl named Mary Ann. And shortly after his birth, his dad disappeared. So he's got a teenage mother who lives in a part of New Orleans that's so poor that they call it the battlefield. And there aren't too many options available for a girl like that to support herself and her infant at that point in time. So Louis spent a lot of time with his grandmother, and his mother, unfortunately, had to resort to prostitution a lot of the time to put food on the table. So Louis spends time with his grandmother. He doesn't have shoes. He doesn't have much in his life, and he's working by the age of 7. He's out selling newspapers. He's barefoot singing in the street to try and earn a few extra pennies to support himself. And eventually he has a little sister who comes along into his life, so that means there's more to feed, and life gets a bit harder. Louis had one bright spot in his life at this point, a Jewish family called the Karnowskis, who hire him to do odd jobs, things like collecting the junk and bringing in coal, things like that. But they encourage his musical enthusiasm. They encourage him to sing. And so life continues much like this, scraping by to make ends meet, until 1912. So at this point, Louis is about 11 years old, and he decides to fire his stepfather's rifle into the air during a New Year's party. And for this, he is arrested, and the judge throws him into an institution called the Colored Waifs Home for Boys for an indeterminate amount of time. Now, I don't know exactly how the law works at that point. Here, a judge gives you a sentence. There, the judge just turned him over to the institution, and they were in charge of letting him out whenever they deemed that he'd been sufficiently reformed. So 11-year-old Louis goes to this home, and he's initially not even allowed near the band. So he gets 3 square meals a day, which is an improvement on what he had had before, although it's a long time to be away from his family. But there's a band, and Louis wants to get involved, but he's a boy from the wrong side of the tracks. So it takes the director a while to let Louis in. But he eventually becomes the director of the band, which tells you a lot about both his talent and the way that he's thought of by other people there. After 18 months, not knowing exactly when he was going to get out, he's 13 years old, he's released. He's had a fair amount of training on the cornet, which is a trumpet-like wind instrument. And Louis decided that music is the way he's going to spend his life. So he gets out, he starts selling newspapers again, hauling coal, going back to trying to support himself and his mother and sister. But he also begins in earnest to seek out other musicians and start playing in bands. There are a lot of bands, a lot of music in New Orleans at that time. And it's maybe hard to imagine a 14, 15, 16-year-old playing in a bar, but that's exactly what he did, and he was learning from much more experienced jazz musicians. By the time he's 17, this is in 1918, he's married. And I don't know what you were like when you were 17, but it's a lot to handle to be married already. He married a working girl, a prostitute who frequented the same bar that he was often playing at. But here is the astonishing thing. He also decides to adopt at this point in his life. So he's not even 20, and he adopts this 3-year-old little boy named Clarence. This just blew my mind when I heard about it. Clarence was the child of Louis's cousin, and she had died in childbirth, bringing Clarence into the world. And in addition to that, Clarence had sustained a head injury as a baby, which had left him with brain damage. So here he was, a special needs child, an orphan, and 17-year-old Louis Armstrong decides that he's going to adopt Clarence, and he looks after him for the rest of his life. And when you think about how little Louis had and how much of a struggle it was for him just to try and support himself and get on his feet, to be married and have a 3-year-old special needs child at the age of 17 is really quite astonishing when you think about it. So Louis goes on to have a very colorful life. He's married not once but 4 times. He has numerous affairs. He has at least one other child, someone who claims to be his natural daughter, although no DNA test was done, but he certainly believed she was, and he supported her financially and otherwise while he was alive. And he is one of the most influential jazz figures that there is. I mean, between the period of 1926 and 1928, he and his band, the Hot Five, released 60 records in that 2-year period. I know how difficult it is to make one album. 60? And these weren't just knocked off, sloppy albums. A lot of them were incredibly influential. He was responsible for popularizing scat singing in a 1926 song called Heebie Jeebie. And that influenced, of course, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, and a lot of other jazz singers who came after, including some of the white boys. Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby are heavily influenced by what Louis is doing vocally and on the trumpet. So he casts a very, very long shadow in jazz, and a lot of people love his music even now. But I find it even more amazing when you know a little more about the man and what he came through, to see that kind of legacy that he left, both musically and as well the sacrifices and the things he was willing to do personally. So I hope that enriches your appreciation of Louis' music, and maybe the sense that really beautiful things can come out of really difficult places.